In the world of firefighting and public safety, reliability is key. That's why for over 2 decades, first responders nationwide have trusted the FireStore as their go-to source for essential equipment, apparel, and accessories. Visit thefirestore.com online or in-store today.
For all your medication and narcotic tracking needs, check out the LogRX app, created by career fire and EMS professionals. That's LOGRX.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Flex 7 from TenCate Protective Fabrics. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of enforced technology. Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tencatefabrics.com/Flex 7.
Hey, welcome back to another edition of Fire Engineering's Tactical Impact. I'm your host, Chief Jim Silvernail, and with me is my co-host, Chief Jason Hoevelmann, and we have an additional host this week who's been with us a couple times in the past, but it's always great to welcome Chief Steve Olschwanger. Steve, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you back here again today, my friend.
I appreciate it.
And as always, Jason's here. Jason, how are you, pal?
Doing good. Doing good. The year's flying by. As you and I talk all the time, these episodes seem to come faster and faster, but it's like 5 weeks in between. And then, they just seem to keep coming faster and faster. But we're always finding great content to share, just like we're going through today.
That's right. So, as usual, we try to highlight some phenomenal articles from our magazine, Fire Engineering, as well as some of the classes from FDIC. But today we are highlighting an article from October 2024. And before we start, and I let Jason introduce our guest, I really want to talk about how important this is. You know, we always talk about how, making a tactical impact is more, our job is more than just the bread and butter, which is, we don't like using that word, bread and butter structure fires of the residential type. There's so many other structures out there that we have to be ready for. We have to have the mindset and the tools to be able to attack those. We said numerous times that, you never fight a commercial fire like you do a residential fire. And I think that this is a prime example of what we're going to talk about today. And, one of my biggest complaints is, we get so complacent in the job because the majority of things we do are those residential structure fires that we rely on that 200-foot pre-connect for every fire that we have. But as we know, we're going to encounter a job or a fire that's going to really test us and be past that 200-foot pre-connect. And that's where we're at today. But I'm going to stop talking and let Jason introduce our guest and our topic today.
Yeah, so going through the October edition of Fire Engineering, came across this article, Considerations for Interior and Exterior Vertical Hoseline Stretches, and thought it was a really great article that outlines the need for some flexibility and agility in how you deploy your hose lines and where you need to do that. And so reached out to Dave Quick, who's a 30-year veteran of the fire service. He's a lieutenant with the Manchester, New Hampshire Fire Department, assigned to Engine Company 11. He's a lead instructor in the department's recruit school, where he teaches engine company operations, senior staff instructor at the New Hampshire Fire Academy, and he's got a bachelor's degree in fire science from the University of New Haven. And he wrote an outstanding article on, again, being flexible and adaptable with your hose stretches in certain situations. So, Dave, I'll turn it over to you, and you can add anything I missed in your bio, and kind of talk about what led you to write the article.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me on today. No, the bio was great. I don't have anything to add to it. The one thing I liked about having to write that bio for fire engineering is that they said it had to be short and sweet, and I liked that part of it. So, thanks again for having me on. I was humbled and shocked the other day when you reached out. It totally surprised me and took me off guard. So, the article was sort of a labor of love. It probably took me over a year to write. It's the first one that I've had published. And as I was saying before the show, I don't have too many career checklist items, but being published in fire engineering was certainly one of them. I've been reading that magazine since 1994. So I've been telling everyone to see your name and your words and their print and their font and their color, man. It's outrageous. Not something I ever probably expected, but super glad that it happened. So the article actually started from teaching at the New Hampshire Fire Academy. I was really frustrated probably 6-7 years ago with how we were teaching folks how to rope stretch. In my city, we're an old New England mill city just north of Boston. So a lot of 2.5-story wood frames with 3 floors of apartments. They're called revival style or New Englanders. And we also have a lot of 3-story flat tops, also known as 3-deckers. And because of the tight hallways and landings, we do a lot of vertical stretching on the outside, whether it's a pump leg drop or, more importantly, a rope stretch. And what I was seeing from the textbooks was folks were just teaching you either to send the nozzle up or take that hose, fold it in half by 3 feet, put a clove hitcher on the nozzle, a couple half hitches, and send it up. What I was seeing over and over again on my job is the nozzle would come into the window and folks would go hand over hand. There's a big pile of spaghetti at your feet. It wasn't laid out properly. It wasn't flaked out. So although we didn't want to go up the inside because it was too tight and too difficult, we'd go up the outside, and we still weren't always doing a great job. So that kind of translated into teaching a different technique at the Fire Academy. But more importantly, as I started instructing more, I realized we don't always do a great job of explaining the whys and where you would use these techniques. So I would say the article sort of started as an outline just for rope stretching a few years ago. And as I start to look around our city, we're the largest city north of Boston. We're about 115,000 people. But just like every place else, although we have 25 defined high rises, we have a plethora of those 6 stories and below. And like most places, they're starting to become more and more common. And although we have a pretty good staffing model and response model, that building that you're showing there is in my first due. That's only a couple of years old now. Even we were having a hard time thinking about stretching up to the 4th or 5th floor off the back step. So I started to deep dive into why were we seeing an increase in these buildings. And as we started to do some pre-planning in our area, looking at the layouts, looking at the building construction and features, we quickly realized that we were going to have to start to adapt and be more forward thinking in the fact that these buildings aren't occupied yet, or we didn't have as many occupied yet. And we had this opportunity to start to think about how we would handle incidents in there ahead of time. So that's sort of the background of the article. And I guess like most people, you find folks that see more in you than you see in yourself. So I was glad to have some folks kick me in the butt to start writing. But more importantly, when I wanted to give up a couple times during the project, they said, no, this is something worthwhile to keep going through. And so I'm glad that you guys found it useful and happy to talk through it today.
Well, we are definitely glad to have you here today. And we really wanted to get into this article and to get some good learning points out of it, which there are. There were some really good takeaways. And, the first off, talk about the structures. I really liked how you kicked off with, hey, you can't really combat these things until you know what you're up against. And kind of talk about how important the pre-planning aspect is of your still area, not just for these types of fires, but all fires in your area.
For sure. So what I really like about the techniques that are discussed in the article and the considerations, you can use most of them for anything over 2 stories or 2 stories and above. So it doesn't even have to be these newer style buildings. So keep that in mind as we're talking about things. Even if you just have that main street with 3 stories, you can still take all these considerations and use them. So what we started to see, like most places, is we were getting type 1 or type 2 floor number 1s with multiple stories of wood frame above it. And as we started to look at that, we were looking at stairwell layout. We were looking at whether or not the windows opened or closed. We started looking at the size of the apartments, seeing how they were stacked in those buildings. What we've found generally, and I would say over 90% of the time, you do get nuances in these buildings, is those corner units that you see are always the largest apartment. They're usually your 2 or 3 bedrooms, depending on what they're offering. And I think that that's super important to know. We started to look at some other features as well. Which stairwells dump out to the outside and give you direct access top to bottom. So in that picture that you see right there, you see that yellow piece that's going from floor 2 up to floor 6. And you can't tell all that well there, but it's tapered. Number 1, there's a door there that enters right into the stairwell. That gives us direct access top to bottom in that building. What's really cool is within that area that's tapered in the yellow, it's also a well. So we have the ability to either go up the stairs there on the tread. We could do a rope stretch, and we could bring the hose up through that well. The well isn't like your typical stairwell well. It's almost like a vertical shaft, or it would allow us to bring a bundle upstairs and lower the coupling down. But in this particular building that you see here, we've started now as the first due engine. Instead of just going to the front of the building where the panel is the back end of our tailboard goes to where that door is located and lines up with on the street. So it gives us a lot of different options when we pull up. So we started to really look at all those different features when we got out there, length of stretch and, like I said, stairwell height, layouts. Generally speaking, with these buildings, you find that the height on floor 1 is a lot more than the height on the rest of the floors, because they're usually a nice lobby area, or maybe they've got some commercial, maybe it's a parking garage. And then what we also find is sometimes those stairwells are like a straight run return versus a return. So you go high stairwell, straight run, and then into a regular return stairwell, which then requires a lot more hose on your stretch. We also took a look at windows, whether they opened or closed, and what those impacts would be. I think a lot of times folks think they're going to walk up to these places and it's super easy in their mind just to take a window. But for those of us that have tried to take a window that isn't designed to open, we quickly realize how hard it is, and we get pretty humbled when the tool bounces off of it. So those are some of the different considerations we look at when we're pre-planning.
Dave, what I noticed too about at least that picture, whenever it was taken, or maybe it's just a rendering, but not a car on the street, nothing blocking that doorway, nothing blocking the front, the side. You got to be, not you, but everybody needs to be thinking, on a normal day when that thing's burning, there's going to be 900 people standing there and probably 50 cars blocking your way, and you don't know where you can park, how much hose.
Yeah, it's a great point. That was taken on a Sunday morning, and that's our main drag. So there's 4 lanes of road there on top of parking on the street. So good catch.
We talked about that building, and you also have this picture of this building of the courtyards. And we talk all the time about what kind of hose package are you going to utilize to get even close to these structures. I know that even in where we're at in the suburban St. Louis County, we have a ton of these. The setbacks, the areas, they're hard to access. And are you prepared for this? Steve, I know you probably had a bunch of these in U City in your day.
Absolutely, tons of them, and and Jim, kind of like what you said in the beginning, we're so complacent to pull up and have a 1 or 2 room house fire that you pull one line, maybe 2, you're there 30, 40 minutes. But yeah, you've got to be thinking about these long stretches and how you're going to get the hose there, how you're going to get it through that gate or that fence, it looks like there, if need be. And, it's easy to throw the hose over the fence, but how are you going to get over there? There's just a ton of, like Dave said, pre-planning that needs to go into these buildings these days. And, we just don't get the fires we used to. It takes a lot of work to be good at your craft right now. And it's not just pulling up and hoping everything goes right, because usually it's not. You got people hanging out the windows there, you know what happens then. So, yeah.
But I think it's a good point, the fact that, being prepared and training for these fires. But there's more than that, too. There's also the resource aspect. I talk about this all the time, that we're so complacent with the tuner for pre-connect that sometimes we forget about the working aspect of the fire truck, and the working end of the fire truck is really the back.
Hey, Jim, for just a second, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Dave, you mentioned in that picture those corner units being significantly larger than the rest of the building. I just wanted you to elaborate a little bit of the significance of that for those that may not have taken that into consideration.
Yeah, the biggest thing that we found now with these buildings, especially if they're luxury versus low income or workforce housing, is that most of those are going to be 3-bedroom. And what happens is they have these long hallways that come from the main door. So as you come down, you've got these almost like flat style or railroad style, like you would have had back in, or that they have down in New York City, that were built probably back in the early 1900s. So you go down this hallway and you've got all the bedrooms off to either the right or the left, including the bathroom. And then you've got the living space and the kitchen behind it. What we found with those corner units is that hose now in these buildings is you're going to require more than 50 feet in there to be able to get back to the living area and to make that turn. So even the estimate as far as how much you need for the working area, we're used to apartments not needing more than one length. We've found, at least in our city, that those corner units require a minimum of 60 feet, if not a little bit more.
Great, because all these new apartment buildings, they're, like you said, it's almost like a shotgun unit in those corners. And so I just wanted to, it just crossed my mind that not everybody may be seeing those yet, but it does have an impact on your deployment packages. Thank you.
That was a great follow-up. Thank you.
Great catch, Jason. Sorry I skipped you earlier, but that's why we work as a team. Let's get back to the fire truck if we can. The engine. We talk about it all the time. We get so complacent with that 200-foot pre-connect, we sometimes forget about the working end of what it's going to take to make these long stretches, especially above grade or into those courtyards. And are these trucks prepared for that? It's funny when you go and you ask a young firefighter, have you ever seen a hose turned on its side? And they would like, what are you talking about? Why would I see a hose turned on its side? Because it's more than a flat load. Sometimes we have horseshoes. We have all these hose packages that are made for these stretches, or, you have to have the ability to make those long stretches. But kind of talk about what your thoughts are, Dave.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I think with these buildings, obviously, in the way that they're set back, the access issues, we need to consider more than the 200-foot pre-connect, and probably in a lot of places more than the 300-foot pre-connect. I like to say what used to be considered alternate stretches in most of America are going to start to become their everyday stretch. And as we started with earlier, it's an opportunity now for folks to look ahead while these buildings are being built, or while they're in the planning phases, to be prepared for when they're erected. So this is what the back end of one of our engines. It's the first engine that we've gotten that's got a low hose bed. We just took delivery of another one. And we're super proud of this engine and the way that it was laid out. We bought it with some extra dividers in there, knowing that especially the new one, the area where it's going to go protect, it's a lot of garden style apartments. It's, believe it or not, our lowest run volume, but our highest population area with all new builds. So from a new build standpoint, yeah, I think that fire departments need to not only look at what their built environment is today, but truly start to think about what it could become, even if right now ordinances and planning and zoning don't allow for it. If you have a lot of real estate that you can still develop, I think that you need to think ahead and look at what's being built in the rest of the country to see what's coming probably down the line, and then start to build your engine out that way. We know now, especially with the way the engine delivery times are and folks that have just received things, they may not have thought ahead, but now they're in that boat where, hey, I've got these buildings coming in, and although I didn't design my hose bed for it, what are some of the modifications that I could make? And I don't have a picture there, but we have our back step that wasn't designed with these alternate and longer stretches. And what we did is we went to the shop and they fabricated some metal dividers, so that way we could create more hose beds. We made it so we could go longer with some flat loads and then be able to put shoulder bundles on top of it. So I think the first thing that fire departments need to do is just look and kind of be creative. One thing I love about the fire service is that we're pretty good at being creative, and we're really great problem solvers. So take a look, and is it just a matter of moving hose bed dividers or adding some? Is that going to give me what I need? If the answer is no, I'm kind of limited with what's there, well, start looking at the different hose loads that you're using. Can I go from, a double wide flat load to a double stack Minuteman, say, to get me 400 or 500 feet? Can I put a horseshoe or two horseshoes on top of a flat load? Can I combine, different types of things to create better space, different hose loads together? So I think that it can be done. You just have to be creative as far as coming off the back end. And then if you really don't have any of that room off the back end, can I go with what I have and then carry a bundle in a compartment that just gets added onto, once I get to where I'm going to or inside the building? I understand that it's not ideal. However, if that's the only thing you can do and you get proficient in it, it'll help make you successful on the fire grounds.
That is a great point, and that's one of the things that I really stress, especially with our Quint fire apparatus. So, we always talk about, well, Quints are necessary in our world because we don't have true truck companies, so we have to get an aerial ladder there. But that truck also functions at our engine. But the problem with that engine is you don't have the versatility with that hose bed. So how do you make these stretches happen? And the obvious answer is, well, I just have a bunch of forwarded 2.5 inch, 3 inch hose, however you do it, preferably 2.5 up to the Y, and I can get 300 to 400 foot off if I have to through the courtyard, and then attach that attack bundle. Well, if you don't practice with that or you don't train, that's easier said than done. And a lot of times that's going to be a very challenging feat for you. Like I said, if you don't really take hands on to that. And I think we spent a lot of time in the training. I know, Jason, I know your folks probably do too on that aspect.
Yeah, we've gotten better at it. We still have a lot of room to improve, but our demographic, our area, the last several years, we've seen more and more, or an increase in the apartment fires that we've been running. And we found areas where certain deployment packages just aren't enough, and they're cumbersome because they're not really built for the environment that we're putting them into. So we've had to make adjustments, and we've stuck with the 200 foot pre-connects, but we use those static loads a lot more than we have in the past.
Yeah, I think you made a very good point in that if you have the ability and you have a good leadership in place that supports you developing apparatus for your response, not developing a response around an apparatus, I think you're going to be way more successful.
I think one important thing too, when you talk about quints, is that something I learned when I was a captain was that, when you start having these extended stretches, especially like portable standpipe, lays and things like that in the courtyards or otherwise, is you need to be aware of your water supply, because you can put a lot of water on the ground and not have the ability to move it all without that secure water supply coming up behind it. And so you need to know what those capabilities are. And if you are stretching 405 feet of 3 inch and then an attack line, you can use a lot of water really quick if you got a small booster tank.
All right, before we get off the resource aspect of this article, I want you to talk a little bit about you had a sub box in there about the new 1 3/4 hose. Would you elaborate a little bit into that?
Sure. Modern fire hose today, between what its internal diameter is uncharged and then what it swells to and charges to, allows you to go much further than you could in the past. So as an example, you could have an 1 3/4 fire hose and it plugs dry at, 1.81 or 1.88 inches. But then when you charge it, it swells to, 1.91, 1.94, 1.98. Well, now you're getting closer to that 2 inch hose. So we used to hear, and I still see all the time across the country, the rule of thumb of, well, we're not going to go any further than 300 feet with our 1 3/4 hose. And once we get to that point, we're going to have to fill that out with 2.5. So that's really based on older constructed hose with rubber lining that wasn't as smooth and 100 PSI nozzles. So that old rubber line hose, you'd be looking at, say, 35 or 40 PSI per 100 friction loss. So if I go out 300 feet, let's call it 40 per 100. That's what New York City uses, and a lot of the fire service adapts its tactics from there. So I think this is a good example of that. So I got 120 pounds of friction loss just in the hose. I throw 100 PSI nozzle on there. Well, now I'm at 220. That's 220 flow, which means that the static pressure, if you're not using a governor, my job doesn't use governors, my static pressure is going to be close to that 250 max PSI rating at that point. So, based on the old calculations, we couldn't do it. But now when you look at newer hose, especially if you get something that's charging, say, to that I'll call it 191, 194 area, well, the friction loss is only 20 or 25 pounds per 100. So I use that in conjunction with a low pressure nozzle. Well, if I go out at, say, 25 PSI per 100 and I'm out 500 feet, well, it's 125. I throw a 50 PSI nozzle on there, I'm at 175. And even accounting for, in my job, with a couple extra pounds of static pressure, I'm still at only like 200. I'm nowhere up near that 250 test rating or really what the operational pressure is. So I'm able to go further. I'm able to the chief's point, not fill my line with as much water as if I was filling it out with a 3-inch or 2.5-inch hose. And most importantly, every fire hose needs to be, or every attack package must be maneuverable. That's in weight and then outside charge diameter. That way you can grip it. And you get that with the 1.75-inch hose. So I think as the technology is improved, we have a better understanding of the characteristics of our fire hose. There are many fire departments where you're seeing 400 or 500 feet of 1.75-inch, and they're able to run that and charge all of it and not have any issues pumping, but more importantly, getting water where it needs to be quickly.
That's outstanding. You said a lot there. It was a very intelligent conversation you just had, really quick, and I'm very impressed.
I apologize.
So
that's my nerdism coming out.
No, we need that. Well, let's get into tactics, shall we?
Let's do it.
Talk about, you made a good point about interior versus exterior stretching. So let's get into that. Any of my other hosts here want to ask them any questions before we let them go on the interior versus exterior? All right, we're going to turn it over to you. Let's talk about that.
Sure. So for anybody that's taken the Nozzle 4 program, Aaron Field talks about the rules of 3 when it comes to how he does some things on the engine as far as stretching line. I think in the fire service as a whole, from start to finish as an engine company, especially a first due engine company, if you break things down to no more than 3 options or 3 variables, you're going to be successful. As Aaron talks about, the brain does its best work when it has no more than 3 options or 3 variables. And when you start looking at some of the research and some of the studies on decision making, we find that in the fire service, outside of like technical rescues, we don't make a lot of comparison decisions. We make we're going to do this based on what we see. And when that doesn't work, we're going to go on to the next thing. So when we start looking at these options of interior and exterior, I always encourage folks to try to pick 3 options for the inside and 3 options for the outside. In my opinion, there's really only 3 options for the inside, so that makes it pretty easy. But on the outside, I list 7 options. And what you need to do is look at your built environment, your operations, your staffing, and find the ones that are going to work best for you, because there's some that are listed there that we don't use in the city of Manchester, but they're still good options. And I've had good conversations with folks that have personally used those. So I just like to preface it with that. Narrow your stuff down as much as you can, and your folks will be super successful on the fire ground. So as far as the interior options, there's 3. The first one is the traditional tried and true on the stairs, on the treads, up to where you need to get to. We know that it works pretty well for us, but what's some of the disadvantages? Some of the disadvantages, especially in these new buildings, if they've got straight run return stairs, is I'm going to use up a lot. There's going to be a lot of pinch points. It's going to take a lot of staffing to get those up there. So, again, if I've got the staffing to do it, I truly think that this is a pretty good and pretty fast approach. The second one's going to be your well stretch, and that's that space between the stair treads and sort of that inside piece of the stairwell. Not every building's going to have it. We love those well stretches if the building's equipped with it, and we use them a lot in our city when we have that option. Some of the biggest takeaways, and you see in the picture there, and I don't see a lot of folks doing this, is you got to store the amount of hose there in the lobby or at the base of the well. Really, it's the base of the well. That happens to be the lobby of the building that you see. You got to store that there so you've got that hose to go right up and in place. If you can, too, have someone down at the base of that well to help you feed the hose up. We know that one length of hose is going to get us at probably 4 or 5 floors, depending on what the height is, and it makes for a really quick and easy stretch. The third component from an interior stretch is going to be the standpipe. I love everything about the engine company, and I love doing standpipe operations, but as much as I love it, I try to avoid it at all costs. I think there's a really big misconception right now in the American Fire Service when it comes to standpipes and standpipe design. Most of the bigger names that I see out there talking about standpipes are really talking about standpipes and standpipe use in high rises. And the numbers that they're throwing out there with 100 PSI and 65 PSI and PRV and PRD and pre-93 and post-93 has to do with automatic wet and automatic dry and semi-automatic. And for the most of America and where these buildings are going up, they've got manual wet systems in them. So those manual wet systems have water to feed the automatic sprinkler side. And there's some residual water in there for us, but what they don't understand is that the piping is designed so that we can supply the pressure and the volume to the top two most floors that meet what the automatic standard would be. So although standpipe systems are an option, I always ask folks, how many people are you running? How quickly can you support the FDC? And what I found in a lot of cases is most fire departments with their staffing have an easier time stretching to the third, fourth, or fifth floor with a 400-foot hose line off the back step than they can to get their standpipe bundles out, get them connected, get the FDC fed, leave someone at the control valve, get it bled out, get to the door, control it. So you really have to look at the type of system that you have and determine whether or not that's even a realistic option based on where you're working.
And that's more reliable, in my opinion, than a wet manual standpipe system.
Absolutely.
Just due to the way that they're constructed, especially if that connection is not going straight through the wall, but is a yard connection, which is very common. Those are highly unreliable.
And if you don't do it a lot, you're right. It's not an easy task with the standpipe, the FDC, getting everything. Yeah, you're right. You probably already have water on the fire by the time all that gets done, doing it the conventional way.
Yep.
Taking it yourself.
So your article gave us a lot of alternatives, and you discussed, there's a possibility of a time where interior won't work for you. So kind of tell us when the interior won't work.
Yeah, so the interior is not going to work for you when you have probably access to the building that's pretty far away. You got to go down those long courtyards. And now once I get to the building, I've got, let's say 300 feet that I got to go up the interior stairs, down the hallway, and to get to that fire apartment. Really, the reason why you're going to go to the outside over going through the inside is that you're going to be faster in getting water on the fire. So that's really the main reason why you would.
All right. So you, as you've done with the interior, you've provided different alternatives for that exterior stretch. So why don't you start, kind of talk them up, talk about which ones you like or which ones that are really effective for you, and I'll illustrate that.
All right. So I put them in order in the article of efficiency and the ones that I think are going to have folks be most successful and make the most sense. So number one is the rope. We do, like I said, a lot of rope stretching in my department. Number one, because of those tight stairwells. But number two, we've found recently, especially, we've had 4 fires on my group in the last 2 months where we've gone on a engine and truck response only to find a fire. So that rope stretch is really versatile for a lot of things. So number one, I go to alarm activation, I get to an upper floor, and I realize that I've actually got a smoke condition or I got a fire. And the last thing I want to do is have to run back outside and stretch that line up. Hopefully I've trained my chauffeur well enough to be able to deploy that hand line by themselves, at least to the base of that building, and then be able to send the hose up via the rope. On my job, our plate man, back step guy, they're required to carry the rope bag with them just for that reason. Remember too, these rope stretches might be good for getting another hand line up top in the building when you've already got 2 lines through any one opening. So it doesn't even have to be for that initial hand line. It could be for checking for extension on the 4th or 5th floor just to get it up there. So it doesn't have to be right off the bat that you use this. I lay out 2 different options or 2 different ways to bring it up there. One is a way that we use a lot where you send about 40 or 50 feet of hose up with the line already flaked out. So when you have a long runway on the inside, you can bring that in the window and is essentially already flaked out for you. Again, I didn't like how people were bringing the hose in hand over hand and making a big pile of spaghetti. And there were times we saw the hose turn into a knot because the nozzle went through one of those bites. And then the other way that you can do it, depending on what it looks like on the inside, is to grab the middle of like a bundle of hose and send that up the outside. Again, the rope stretches are super versatile. Rope's not all that heavy. For these buildings, you're looking at about maybe, I recommend to folks 85-foot piece of rope that allows you to tie a nice big bite in the end of it and allows you to be able to stretch into buildings that are considered non-high-rise. It'll be enough to get you to the base of the building and then allow whoever receives that to maybe pull it out to where the hose is. So rope is number one for me. Maybe I'm a little biased because we do it. We've been successful, but I think that's the best way to go.
So I've used this technique, and I know probably these other gentlemen have too. I know, Steve, you've had these fires in your city, and Jason, I know you've had these too. What are the feelings of doing this to the apartment next door? Do you have any problem with that? I guess it really depends on the hallway and the tenability of the hallway, but I have done it both ways, where I've been overcautious, been the floor below, or I have knocked out the door next to it or the window next to it and gone in. What are your thoughts?
For me, I know it's an unpopular opinion in the fire service, but if conditions allow, I'm going to the fire floor. I'm going to the adjacent apartment. I prefer to go to the adjacent apartment than the apartment across the hall. That gives me more flexibility. Number one, I know a lot of folks like to pop open that apartment door across the hall from the fire apartment. I'm not a fan of that just because of that flow path and if there's any kind of wind event on the other side. By coming into the adjacent apartment, I think it allows you some protection. And also, if you get chased back to there, I think you have that option to open up the wall and try to flank it from the side, especially in an event where it could be wind driven. But you bring up a good point. And I guess I should have started with these exterior stretches and talking about going to the fire floor versus the floor below when we were talking about pre-planning. So let me just step back before we go on to the other pieces. What we found with those buildings and going back to pre-planning and look at the layout is coming in on the floor below with any of these exterior stretches and stretching to the fire apartment on the floor above requires a lot of hose. So one of the things we realized is we measured the distance from the outside wall of the apartment to where the door is into the interior public hallway. And religiously, we found a minimum of 30 feet inside that apartment, with some of them being closer to 50 feet. So let's just, for round numbers, say it's like 40 feet. So it's a length of hose to get from just the window into the public hallway. From there, let's say that I'm right next to the stairwell, which we know may or may not be an option because we may not have good access into that area. Maybe it's fortified, it takes a while to force. So let's just say conditions are good. I got at least 50 feet of hose to get up to the floor above. So now I've got, say, 50 feet on the outside of the building, 50 feet through the apartment, 50 feet to get to the floor above. So I'm already at 150 feet. We know that in these buildings that those stairwells can be up to 400 feet apart. So if I get a middle unit, I got a 200-foot stretch down just to the middle. It doesn't matter which stairwell I pick. And then I need hose for the fire apartment. So to think that we're going to do something other than you go to the fire floor itself or use the standpipe, I think is kind of foolish. I don't think that you're able to, in a lot of cases, some cases you will, but to bring all the needed hose that you need up there to go to the floor below and make those apartments up above.
Plus, you need the extra manpower to feed the line up, get the kinks out, if you get caught on the stairwell or a doorway or whatever. So,
yeah, good point.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to option number 2.
So option number 2 is a bundle with a coupling drop. I didn't know anything about this until I took Nozzle Forward back 8 years ago with Aaron Field, and I think it's a great technique. We've used it a few times here. I really like it for car fires and parking garages. A lot of folks talk about using the manual dry standpipe system in parking garages, and I'm not a fan of that because of how long it takes to fill that piping, on top of the fact that it's atmospheric air. It's going to have some rust issues. And more importantly, just like when you do any kind of plumbing work at your house, you turn the water off and you drain the piping. Well, as you turn everything back on, you get those slugs of air out, and that's fine right away. But I know, at least at my house, I found that hours later, I'm still getting those slugs. I don't want that coming out of my hand line. So I think that that's a good use for that. So coupling drop is great. Go to the apartment next door. If you can, drop it down. You're going to get part of that bundle is going to cover the outside stretch, and the rest is going to be for the inside. What I really encourage folks, that's the rope stretch there that we're seeing in 7. That's where you can bring it up with flaking it out, or it's already in line. Going back
Sorry.
that's okay. So
my driving is bad.
well, I got a 15-and-a-half-year-old who's learning to drive, so I'm in the same boat with you. All right, I digress.
I got a granddaughter, 15-year-old granddaughter too, man.
Yeah.
I don't have much hair, but what I had left is gone because of that.
There you go.
Driving with her. I'm with you.
So when you're looking at those bundles, you got to look at how much hose do you carry in there, because if you're going to do a coupling drop, part of that bundle is going to be used to cover the outside part of the stretch. So if I only have 100 feet and I use 35 or 40 of it to get down the outside of the building, it doesn't leave me with a lot of working in. So I got to look at, do I go to a 150-foot bundle? Do I bring multiple bundles? And then more importantly, what's my staffing look like to bring that up there? So great technique. We've used it. However, there's just those considerations that you need to take into account when you're figuring out how many and where to bring them to.
All right, onward.
The third one, sorry.
Yep. No, go ahead.
So the third one would be using that bundle, but then also bringing along a reverse hose roll, 50-foot reverse hose roll with you, so that the male coupling is on the outside and the female is on the inside. So now that 50 feet that you bring up in that roll would be used to cover the outside or exterior portion of the stretch. By putting it in the reverse, the female end's on the ground, so it either gets hooked directly to the engine or to the lead length that's coming from the engine to the base of the building. It allows you to have the male end upstairs with you, which your bundle is going to attach to. Just like with the coupling drops, you need to think about how many bundles you're going to need to cover that maybe floor below or fire floor and compartment, in addition to the hose roll.
Awesome. Moving forward.
The other thing to add in here too is, obviously, if you're in a hallway that's banked down with smoke and you can't see anything, obviously some of these options would be really good to avoid all the other unnecessary. You know how it is when you're going up steps and around corners and doorway. You can't, especially if you can't see. So. Yeah, he brings up a good point about staying as close basically to the fire apartment or room as possible. And because I know our back in the day, and again, I'm old, I'm going back to the early to mid 80s. We had 2.5 with a gated Y on it. We'd pull that to the doorway and then stretch up from there. And it worked, but technology has become our friend over the years. For sure. But, some of these kids today probably don't even know what the alligated Y is.
Let's hope not.
I know, but it's not something, though, that you see, at least like you used to, Again, if it's not 1 3/4 inches on the ground, going in the front door, that's pretty much what they're used to. So.
All right, where are we at?
So the next one, we've used ground ladders a lot. I really like this too. We throw ground ladders just about every fire for a lot of different purposes. And if it's there for the RIC team, great. If it's there to set up possibly for ventilation down the line, great. But here, they're quick, they're easy. You're up the ladder with no problem. So a couple things to think about. Number one, flake out all the hose that you're going to need to go up the ladder at the base where you see there. Obviously, we'd like to have someone footing the ladder. That person who's footing the ladder can not only do that, but also send the hose up the ladder as well. I don't know if folks can see it or not, but in that picture, you'll notice that they're not just bringing the nozzle up. Once again, I don't like how we teach that in Firefighter 1, where we take the nozzle, drape it over our shoulder, and we only bring it up there. Again, once we climb into that window, what happens? We got the nozzle, it comes in hand over hand, and I got a big pile of spaghetti. So what we've done here is we lay that out at the base of the ladder because we know that we need to. We do it in a regular 1.75" lay where I've got the nozzle and the 50-foot coupling next to it, just as if I was going to go through a front door. And what I have my guys do is just walk back and grab what would be the 25-foot bite. So you've got the 25-foot bite as well as the nozzle, and you're going up the ladder. They're able to kind of put that nozzle and a little bit of hose inside the sill. They get inside with it, and then they're able to pull that in. And again, when they pull it in, they've got just about 40 feet of hose with them, and it's already flaked out in line. There's not a whole lot that they have to do. I think you're going to use something like this in an instance where you've got a burnt out set of stairs, a building that's under construction, something that's giving me a lot of trouble on the inside and giving me access to those upper floors. And obviously, once that line's in place, that ladder should stay there, and we'll talk about that at the end of this, but can be there for other purposes as well.
I like your point about this is one of those areas where the new candidate curriculum could be improved upon. Like you said, put that charged or even dry nozzle over your shoulder. It literally just gets to nozzle you and you in the room. And this is basically loading the room just from a ladder position, right?
Yep.
And it makes things a whole lot easier, especially when you're doing that adjacent apartment, right? Because the problem you run into there is stuff. It is navigating all the stuff in the adjacent apartment. And this is probably the best technique you can use in either one of those situations.
What we really like about that, and with the rope stretch where we send it up like you saw in the picture earlier, once you get that 40 feet or so of hose inside, what you can do is go back to the window. If you need more, you just put your foot on the hose, then come in hand over hand a little bit. And once you get enough in the window, since you already have 40 or 50 feet in there, you can just start to backpedal and walk backwards, pulling that hose hand over hand. And now you've just brought that strand inside and laid it down next to everything else. It still keeps it nice and clean and provides you what you need to operate on the interior.
All right. I see the next on our list is exterior stairs or fire escapes.
You got it. So we do a lot of exterior stretches here. If anyone on the show is familiar with Boston, those 3-deckers and 2.5-story frames have a lot of porches, exterior porches. I always say I'm glad that they have them because that seems to be where all of our fires start. I don't think if we had those and cigarettes, we'd go to much work, but we utilize those a lot, both for access and to knock down and then have to stretch up through. So there's some pros and cons to the exterior stairs. It's nice. It keeps you on the outside. It gives you pretty good visibility to get the hose where you want to get to. Some of the downsides, though, is a lot of the landings don't provide you with a lot of room. And what we find is most of the time exterior stairs are on the end of the building. So depending on where the fire is located within that building, yeah, it might give you really great access, but I don't have probably the room to charge 100 feet of hose there and then navigate down, maybe that interior hallway. The other thing is although they provide us with good access, do they have doorknobs on it? And if they do you have Knox keys that allow you to get there? If you don't have Knox keys, it's going to probably be a door you got to force, obviously, and then those are going to be outward swinging. So I already don't have a lot of room to store my hose. Now I've got to put a forcible entry team there to try to get that open. Now, if there is the opportunity to have a fire, or the fire's not that deep into the building, it's a great option. And most importantly, because just like when we stretch up the interior stairs, coming from floor 3 down to 2, I follow that line. It brings me to safety. Same thing with the exterior stairs. Once I get jammed up, I can follow that right back out to the outside. The other nice thing is that it gives me some different options of how I want to get the hose up there. I can coupling drop, I can rope stretch, I can come up the stairs tread on tread. So it provides me a lot of flexibility. I just have to make sure that where the fire is located, it fits my staffing and the space I have to charge the line before I go in.
So I'm not in an area that has a lot of exterior stairwell or stairs like we're talking about. How do you guys have to go in there and really take a look, do your pre-planning to make sure that those fire escapes are absolutely like in shape for you? What are the shape of your fire escapes?
Yeah, before I get to that, one other thing. Those exterior stairs, especially on apartment buildings and commercial occupancies, usually have gates at the bottom of them that you got to get through as well, and other fences. So keep that in mind as far as access. Our fire escapes are not very well maintained. We don't have a ton of them. They're all basically in our main street, our Elm Street downtown area. Just like most cities, they haven't been maintained. They're rusted. We don't know what those points of connections are. Our SOP is to avoid them at all costs and use them only when necessary. So we try to walk up to them, see what those conditions might be, not overload putting people on there, try to send someone up to sort of get some reconnaissance, and more importantly, trying to look from down below and seeing what the access is off of those. Sometimes I see window bars, sometimes I see it only going into a bedroom window and not to a door. And then there's times where they're on a commercial setting where they just open up into an office space and don't give you as good access to the rest of the building. So we don't use them a ton. I put them there as an option, but we try to avoid it if we can.
I think that's a good point. I think that's a pretty common standard operating guideline is stay away from the fire escapes. But all right, let's continue forward and tools.
Yeah, so I've seen this before where we haven't brought a rope bag or something like that. We've been on a porch and we got everybody waiting to go inside, and or they're forcing the door and they realize it's a small kitchen fire or just a smoke condition. So now there's a lot of dudes that are jammed up. Everybody wants a nozzle, and what do? They take like the New York roof hook, they send it over the side, and you're able to hook the bail and bring it up. Again, this isn't a terrible technique. It's not what I would want to do for my first line if I didn't have to, because again, it only sends the nozzle up there. But we've had some fires. We have a lot of utility rooms that are off of our porches. So this can be a really good way, especially with the number of firefighters that we get on the initial alarm, jamming that up, where we could get the line up there without having to charge it. Maybe they didn't bring the rope bag, and it fits its purpose. So that's why it's so low on the list.
And the last one you talk about, I think is, and I like the reason why it's low on your list, but I'm going to let you talk about it. And that's the flying, using a ladder. So why don't you talk about that real quick?
Yeah, I talk to folks all across the country, and they tell me that if they have to go to the vertical stretch on the outside because they can't do something inside, that they're going right to what I have there, number 7, the flying standpipe, and using their aerial if they have it. Now, I'll preface it with my fire department runs dry ladder pipes. So for me, I don't have a pump on there, so someone has to feed it. So it adds one extra caveat to that. But I think there's a lot of different considerations that folks have to take into account. So first and foremost, as soon as I hook up to that ladder with hose on the end of it, I've now rendered that ladder useless for any truck company operations on the outside. I can't rescue, I can't ventilate, I can't overhaul. It's stuck in that position. So that's number one. So I like to break it down into looking at it from an engine perspective and from a truck perspective. So the first thing is what hose am I going to use inside the building? And where is it going to come from? Am I going to use standpipe packs? Am I using hose packs that are there for extended stretches? What does that look like? Number 2, how do I get the hose up there? Is it a tower ladder where I'm going to drive it up? If it's an aerial ladder, now I need to have the folks that are going to climb up the outside, especially if I'm having access issues on the inside. If I'm busy setting the rig up, am I going to have someone take those packs and those bundles and go up the interior stairs and then meet me up where that aerial is coming to? Number 2, do the windows open or do you have to break them? If we're talking about using this, in my opinion, it's probably going to be in a high-rise setting. Well, the high-rises in my municipality, the windows don't open, and they're pretty strong, so we're not going to break them. So I don't have the ability of my rescue company probably to bring the saw up, tape the window, get a nice hole for me, and to bring it in. So I've got to access the issues that I have from the outside. More importantly, depending on where I'm trying to enter the building, what are the access issues on the inside? In these commercial settings, we have a lot of agencies with 3 letters that have offices in my first due. We can't get in there, right? It's really hard with extra locks and everything else. We're not forcing those. So I don't even know that I can come into that space to begin with the aerial. Once I've decided like, hey, I got access, the window opens, everything's playing out perfectly, I got to have someone probably with an appliance bag and a pressure gauge and I've got to set this up just like I would a standpipe system. I should come in at this point from the floor below like I would on a standpipe. So now I've dedicated folks to that. Now, if I only say I have 150 or 200 feet that cover the majority of my buildings off the standpipe, am I going to have another piece of hose I bring up to go from the aerial pipe inside, and that's where I'm going to put a gate valve and an appliance to control it as a standpipe? Or am I going to put it directly on the end of the ladder? Either way, I need somebody there. And then have I already predetermined what the discharge pressure needs to be through that attack package? On top of that, what is the rated pressure on my piping? But more importantly, what's the pressure relief valve set at the base of my aerial device? So for us, I know ours are set at 225 PSI. So now I need to look at the volume of water that's coming through. I need to know what the friction loss and the nozzle pressure required are for the hose pack and the elevation loss. And that obviously can't exceed what the pressure relief valve is coming in at the base of the aerial if you're going dry. I don't have experience with quints or engines with ladders on them, but I would assume there you're okay because it's coming through the pump and going out. But for those of you that have dry aerials, you have to take that into consideration. So that's sort of just the engine things that you have to think about. And then from the truck perspective is, can I get the truck close enough? What I've found with a lot of these new buildings, like we said, they're set back. They've got elaborate landscapes. There's not a lot of hard pavement there. What's the horizontal reach of my aerial versus the vertical reach of it? And can I get close enough? And then how long does it take me to set this operation up? It's going to take a little bit. Get the truck in place, set it up, get all my equipment in line, get it all flaked out inside. I just think that there's other options that will get you there faster for what the majority of the American Fire Service is facing right now.
I'm glad you brought all these up because I'll be honest, a lot of us do not have a lot of fires above grade like this. And when we do, we immediately go to what's the easiest thing available to us. And I'll be honest, if you have a platform or even a straight tip that has the ability to gauge down to attach a hose line, someone's think, oh, that's the answer because it's so easy. But they miss the point that if you're limited in your aerial devices, now what? You just took it out of service because it's a standpipe. You can't overlook that aspect of the whole operation.
Yeah, I think it's something too that, again, it's a good theory thing, and a lot of people haven't gone out to practice and do. I'm sure that there are fire departments that are very proficient at it, and it would work very well for them. But again, with the article being considerations, I'm hoping at least that it's opened the eyes of some to it. If nothing else, go out and try it and see if it really fits into the repertoire the way that they hope and think it's going to.
Well, I definitely think it's an option, but like I said, you got to weigh the pros and cons on everything you do on the fire ground. Hey, I got to tell you, this was a well-written article, and you should be very proud of yourself. And I don't mean to be condescending, but I'm saying you did a phenomenal job on your first write for fire engineering, and I hope you're back for many, many more because this was very, very educational, and this is what we look for. I know I'm just speaking on behalf of myself, but I know Jason and Steve probably feel the same way.
Good topic to submit for FDIC 2026.
I appreciate that. Something that I've considered, so I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I just add one more thing real quick that I want to touch on?
Absolutely.
This is the last piece. Anytime you're to close all the outside stretches, anytime that you go up the outside with hose, put a ground ladder there. We teach all of our firefighters that if they get lost and disoriented, that they should follow this hose line back, and it'll bring them to safety. So just throw a ground ladder there and make sure that hose gets kicked off to the side. That way, if they do get jammed up and they got to leave in a hurry, they're not trying to climb over the hose and down the ladder with the hose on it.
Great point. All right, we're at that point. Let's go through some final takeaways. Dave, you got anything more you want to add?
Nah, I've talked enough.
Steve, what do you got?
He made some phenomenal points. Hell, I learned a lot just listening to him, and great article, great points, and that engine company is the most important piece, in my opinion. I always rode the pumper, on the fire ground, and you make some phenomenal points, and the men and women on those companies need to take heed into what he said and go out and practice those, because it's going to come. There'll be a day when they're going to need to use them, obviously. And yeah, great points.
Jay?
Yeah, I think this just lends to the idea that members need to be intimate with their equipment and their capabilities and all aspects of the job. This isn't something you're going to learn in your candidate school. These things aren't something you're going to be proficient at unless you go out and seek that information, learn how to do it, and really, like I said, get intimate with these components of what you can do with an engine, all the flexibility and options you have to meet the challenges in your own area, as it relates to building construction and the types of buildings. And we're going to see throughout the country more of these types of buildings, like the picture you showed in the very beginning. We're all going to be faced with these challenges, and I think the article was outstanding. Can sit and talk about this stuff for hours, and I really hope that you strongly consider putting this in for FDIC 2026, man. It was a great article. And just reading what I'm reading and listening to you, I know why it took you a year, because it's probably going to be 30 pages long, and you had to figure out how to dial it down. So great job.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so that's it. We brought you another great article out of our magazine, and here it is, October 2024, if you want to try to find it. But once again, we're going to put a plug in for the magazine for FDIC. Registration is open. Make sure you're a part of FDIC 2025. I know I'll see at least Steve and Jason there. Dave, would be great to see you there. But Jason, take us home.
Yeah, so I think lessons for today are, as always, tactics matter. They're also local, but you can take all of these methods and concepts that David talked about today and apply them as you need and as you can. It gives you options, but you can't just go out and do it on the fly. You've got to be able to train and drill and get proficient with these things. Even if you're not going to make these kinds of stretches, just having the ability to adjust to surprises on the fire ground or situations that always present themselves that put a twist in things for us, keep working on those things. And read fire engineering. You're missing out on great content, just like David's article, if you're not reading that magazine. And then the beauty of it is, if you want to ask more questions, all you have to do is reach out to the magazine. They'll put you in touch with the authors, and you can ask, because I'm sure David's got a lot more to add to this topic and others that you may be running similar to him. So stay engaged, keep training, keep drilling, keep learning, share what you know, and always look forward to this opportunity to talk to people like David and Jim and Steve, and look forward to doing it again in 5 weeks.
All right. I want to thank everybody for watching another episode of Tactical Impact. Until next time, from Jason and Steve and myself, I want to say till next time, and be safe.
In the world of firefighting and public safety, reliability is key. That's why for over 2 decades, first responders nationwide have trusted TheFireStore as their go-to source for essential equipment, apparel, and accessories. Visit TheFireStore.com online or in-store today.
For all your medication and narcotic tracking needs, check out the LogRX app, created by career fire and EMS professionals. That's LogRX.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Flex 7 from TenCate Protective Fabrics. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of enforced technology. Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit TenCateFabrics.com/.